Hi everybody. So we're going to get started with our group critique. This is the first part of our final project, and we have two more installments of this project, and then that's the end of our class. So that means we'll have two more group critiques after this particular one. I guess, let's see, the next one will be on Monday. Um, and Okay, so in this particular part of it, what you're doing is creating two achromatic thumbnails, and you chose from either, sort of more of a pattern-based design, like a textile, wallpaper, or wrapping paper design, or an artwork without text for a book or album cover or a poster. So your choice. You got a lot of creative license here in this particular project. So after you have finalized your achromatic studies. I'll give you some feedback on them today, which one I think is the strongest, and maybe some pointers on, developing them a little further. You're going to choose one of them, whichever one, uh, seems to be the going in the best direction, and then you're going to create color studies from that particular thumbnail. And then, so you're going to create, I think it's two different thumbnails, color thumbnails for the next assignment using the color harmonies we've studied. And then from there, what you're going to do is take one of the color studies that works best for the design, all putting it all together, and then maybe do any sort of last touches for the third installment of the final project. So that's where we're heading for this particular assignment. Okay, so let's get started. So it looks to me like you chose probably like the textile wallpaper pattern design. In any case, it looks like both of these, would be appropriate for that. And I think both of them look good. They're different in the sense that this one is more rectilinear, and this one is more sort of, as you say, bubbly. It's like more free form. I think you could use either one of these. Whichever one you like the most. The one thing I would say with both of these is to really do make sure that you crop these edges. Let's see, I've got this open in Photoshop. I'll show you what I mean. So just take your designs and, sort of take them and I'm going to just maybe experiment with this one right here. Because what you have is you have all of your shapes kind of pulled to the edge, but not overlapping it. And that's kind of, you'll get a much more interesting design if you even slightly crop it. But can you see what I'm doing here is like when I do this, what happens is I'm allowing the shapes to move over the edges. And that just is, again, it'll be more powerful. See, what you can do is you can grab all these shapes, select them all in your software and then just make them a little larger and then they'll go over the edges. Or you can add a few more, so you can develop it a little bit more. That's the most important thing I think I would do here. And then this one too, this one seems like you could add a few more shapes in here. Like it feels like, so for the final project, I think that you can keep it, again, quite simple basic shapes like what you're doing, but then add maybe another, just a little bit more complexity. So perhaps you could take this shape, this bigger shape, and then start breaking it apart into smaller shapes. Like you can just use these, the rectilinear idea you have. So, that's a great way of actually creating more complexity in your design, but kind of keeping the basic structure that you have here is sort of dividing up shapes into little patterned areas, if that makes sense. So that's it. I think I'm going in a good direction here, and I look forward to seeing the next installment. Okay, so it looks to me like you're also maybe working with the textile or wallpaper pattern, potentially. I think, and they look like they would really work well for that particular, application. You could sort of see them repeated, and, into a larger pattern. And, yeah, it's interesting, so to me it looks like these are both fairly similar, but different because of these shapes in here, which is interesting. It's like the round and then the kind of more pointed. And I actually think both of them would work pretty well. I'm probably maybe kind of favoring this one a little bit. I don't know, there's something about it I like with maybe the roundness against the rectilinear shapes. But I think this one could work as well. The only thing I would say with yours is I might consider just making these two thumbnails just a wee bit more different than they are. Like right now you've got these two shapes which are different, and then the rest of the design is the same. So maybe play with it like each one a little bit more, and I would say the same thing I would said to Vanessa is you could maybe take and divide some of these shapes up a little bit more. Do you know, like maybe like smaller pieces in different places, like even just like take one of these and add a few little more lines in here, like these kind of lines going through, and then do something a little bit different for this one. So you could keep the basic structure that you have, and again, maybe divide it up in a little bit more. And I could see you almost too doing that with these shapes, like maybe doing kind of concentric circles, you know, or maybe dots or some little pattern in there would be really cute. So yeah, okay, so just kind of keep experimenting with the direction you're going in. Okay, Robert. Yeah, so I also think that this to me looks like a really good sort of textile or wallpaper pattern. Um, that could be really interesting. I really like, well, I think both of these are really interesting. So this one's symmetrical. This is a sort of somewhat asymmetrical, symmetrical. We'll call it asymmetrical because of the diagonal line, but it's kind of, yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's close. Not that it really matters what it is. And so I'm kind of inclined towards this one at the moment, just because I think it's a little more unique with the 6-pointed star, you know, which as I don't know if you remember, with so much material in our class, it's easy to miss some things, but in one of our earlier videos for an assignment, the video talked about how, you know, using a star, when you use a star shape, you should really avoid the 5-pointed star because it is so overused. You know, it's not a very unique type of shape. So that's why I like the 6-pointed one, and I just kind of like the idea of the stripes with this happening. I think that's really interesting. With this one, what I might do is, I don't know, I'd play with these shapes a little bit. It doesn't feel like that's quite fitting in yet. It almost feels like maybe they're a little too tight. Like they need more, there may be a little space between them, or maybe you could almost have like another line here, like you could space them out a little bit, so, or not space them out, but you could have like repeat them, so you could have another line of them here or here, you know, just experiment a little bit more. And I like this one too because it's symmetrical, but I would change the number of stars in this one so that you know, kind of avoid that 5-pointed star that we've talked about, and maybe just kind of keep experimenting more with a few more shapes, like maybe more stars within stars or circles within circles, just to kind of develop it a little bit more with the direction you're going in, which I think is good. It just maybe needs a little bit more detail. Okay, so I think both of these, but essentially I think both of these could work for the final if you just kind of continue to experiment just a little bit more with them. And, yeah, so it's interesting you said this was inspired by a movie. Yeah, there's a lot of times artwork I think can be really inspired by some other art form, like a movie or music. You know, there's a lot really that you can find in those, you know, that are you know, you can build on in your own unique creative way. So I think that's a great idea. Yeah, so in both of these designs, I kind of, so this is probably the one I think is the most sort of, has the most potential and seems to work well together. Like, I really like these kind of soft marshmallow forms. They're, you know, they're quite unique in terms of shapes, and they also seem to go well with these kind of sort of smooth lines too. Like, they're all kind of based on these round forms, which I think is interesting. I also like the pattern you're creating here, which is quite interesting. This shape here, I might play a little bit more. It almost feels like it's a little too, like it needs, like if I use this shape, I would use maybe a few more of these shapes and kind of build a little kind of, maybe have them sort of all built here. It looks like they're maybe like sort of abstracted birds. So you could have a little flock of them, so that then you get unity if you repeat that shape, you know, because right now this shape doesn't quite belong with these shapes, but it could if you gave it more shapes, if that makes sense. It's just a way of blending in more shapes, is having them repeat. And this one, I don't know, this one to me is, and that's one of the wonderful things about doing different studies, which is you'll find that in all of our classes we really will be doing this a lot, where we ask you to develop at an initial stage of a project different options, like design options, because the point is that not every thumbnail is going to work, but we hope that one will. And in this case, I would just say that this one is an interesting experiment in a different direction, which is good, but it seems like this is the one that has the most potential. And I also really like the depth that's been created here. So, yeah, okay, well, good job, and I would probably just kind of keep experimenting just a little bit more with this one to develop it. Yeah, these are both very interesting. There's also something similar about them, even though they have a different vibe, but that kind of misty, foggy, silhouetted, abstracted thing is pretty interesting. So for this particular project, I would say this is probably the one that I would go with. And just the reason why is just because when we're working with color, it really helps to have more shapes, like more things involved, because then when you have a harmony, you can really develop that harmony by, working with value and saturation in different places, if that makes sense. So this particular design it's a good design as well, and it would probably work for a different purpose than like experimenting with color. So I would go with this one. And I could see potentially you maybe adding a little bit more to this, maybe just taking some of these shapes and sort of having them maybe fade out into the background, like to repeat them and have them, and again, for the sake of building more complexity into the design, which will be, you'll find more interesting and also educational to add color to more shapes as we get going with that in the next assignment. So that's what I could see you doing that with this one too, if you wanted to. I'm sort of leaning towards this one as the one to go forward with, but if you really prefer this one, I would probably do the same thing, as maybe just have a few more of this, like repeat this shape and have it overlapping and getting, diminishing sizes and overlapping. If you remember that lesson we did, like maybe have this shape, this whole shape going into the background, or maybe even another shape if you like. Okay, so that's what I would do with each of those designs, whichever one you want to move forward with. So it looks like you also worked with a pattern, which is good. And you have this sort of like a star shape here, and then kind of this interesting sort of like, when you take a square and you flip it, you get more of a diamond. You can stretch it a little bit too, which is a really interesting shape. And yeah, I think both of these could work as designs, depending which one you chose. And I would say, with both of them, I might just work with a little bit more complexity, like maybe somehow you could, like with this one, have more stars within stars. I think that's a wonderful idea. Or with this one, you could maybe have like some shapes, like so you could take this smaller shape. It's probably it might just be a little bit small to add more, but you could almost maybe add a pattern into maybe the background, or kind of break up the shapes a little bit more, kind of play with it a little bit more. But I think both of these are, and again, just for the reason why I mentioned to previous people, is that it's good to have to take your design and make it just a wee bit more complex, so that you can have more color options later on. I would also just take your shapes and kind of like it feels like this is getting a little close to the edge, and it wants to line up. So I would maybe remove that space in there. Something too, working with this design, something to keep in mind too is that these squares, if you find that they're a little limiting, these background squares, you may just want to float these shapes onto a solid background and play with them. Because sometimes when you get sometimes what happens is you get a little locked in with this type of design, where you don't have the kind of open space to sort of move things around and do overlapping and diminishing size and things like that, which I could see you doing here too with each of these little modules. So keep that in mind as a possibility. All right, let's see. I'm going to pull this up into Photoshop so we can just zoom in a little bit more. Sometimes that's always a good idea. These are both really interesting designs. I love the idea of having, repeating elements, like the repeating tree. I think that's really nice, and you can, we've studied depth, so we could really apply those color ideas in here, which would be great. And this one's also really interesting too. You're using the same tree motif, but then you've got like a really different back. I really love the idea of this big shape behind there. That's really cool. And this one's really cool too. I don't know. They're both really interesting. I'm kind of thinking, leaning a little bit towards this one. There's something very dramatic about it, you know, filling the space. Um, I would say just a couple things maybe with this one that I might work a little bit more is, you know, this design is almost symmetrical, you know, in the sense where you can take a line and go through it and mirror it, you know, where you can fold it and both sides are perfectly symmetrical. And in general, in design, when things are getting close to being symmetrical, it's better to push it right to symmetry than to have it like almost there. Like it's one of those things where are visually as a viewer, we would then try to make it symmetrical in our minds. So I would kind of like, I could see this going symmetrical, like having everything perfectly like mirrored, or I could see, you know, making it asymmetrical and just moving this element off to the right or the left, and maybe this element off to the other side. You know what I mean? Like taking this and pushing it a little bit this way and this pushing it a little bit this way. Then you could have an asymmetrical design and, you know, all of this could stay the same, bottom here. Okay, so that's, I think, the main thing. I think this could work too, you know, maybe a few more stars to kind of fill the space possibly, or maybe, yeah, somehow this and this needs to somehow come together a little bit more. So maybe just having some stars that kind of spreads across and unites these two a little bit. So I think that could work too. In both of these, I would really take the outlines off of the trees so that you can, you know, because again, that black outline can really, or even a colored outline can really constrict things and take away from things like depth and, you know, the intermingling of the colors. So I would probably just get rid of that, or I would make it more obvious, like make them thicker, play with them so that there's different sort of thicknesses so they become more of designed part, make them more designed. This here, the lines here maybe on the dragon, I think that could be, it'd be okay to leave those maybe. You could sort of experiment, but I think they kind of work a little bit better because they're more like a drawing. This is more of a drawing, whereas these feel a little bit more geometric. Anyhow, okay, well, I look forward to seeing which one you choose and where you go with this. Leanne, let's see. So yeah, the cover of a book. I think that's a great idea here. You know, book covers are always very evocative, and you know, they're intended to draw you in to reading the book. So they have, if you go to any bookstore, you'll notice that book covers, there's very, I think, very intriguing designs. So, so in ones you've got a corridor. In both of these, you've got it's a three-dimensional design with the perspective. On the right-hand side, you've got like a house, you know, silhouetted with a road, and then the left one is a corridor. Both of them have the idea of like going somewhere, which is interesting. I can see why this would be for the same story. I don't know. I'm a little inclined towards going with the right-hand one at this point. Somehow I like the space and the angles seem to work well together. You know, you've got angles here, and this all seems to work. Yeah, you know, I think this could be an intriguing idea. This glow here, I would probably try to, rather than using the lens flare, I would probably just try to build this with shapes, because I think you will, well, first of all, like lens flare, I'm not sure if that's exactly the filter you use, but it kind of seems, it can seem a little generic. Like you just press a button and you get the lens flare. Whereas if you like build it like just by doing concentric circles, like circles within circles, and then like starting light and then going darker, it'll look a lot cooler and more kind of custom. And you can play with the color a lot more that way too. So I can see that, and also then it'll become like a real feature of your design, like something really interesting. So that's, I might, like, we'll sort of see where that develops. I might have some more ideas on the composition. You know, right now it feels like maybe it could use more complexity to it, but I would probably start by reworking this area and see where that goes. Maybe you could add some patterns, you know, into different areas, like break it apart. In this one here, yeah, so Yeah, again, I'd probably go with this one. I think the sense of space here will allow you to be more creative. And, this project is really, as you go through the different stages, you can add or remove or kind of play with it. And I think this particular structure, compositional structure, gives you more of that organic possibility. So again, I would go with that one. Okay, I think that's it, everybody. I'm really pleased with the direction everybody's going in so far, and I'll look forward to our next critique on Monday when we look at everybody's color compositions. Just keep in mind that you're going to be choosing one of these designs, not both. One is going to be chosen, and it's going to be identical. So if you choose this one, whatever's here is going to be moved here, and the only thing that's going to be different about the two thumbnails is the color. Okay? All right, let me know if you have any questions. Otherwise, have a great weekend.